Hey guys, so before we start this video, I really want to emphasize the importance of leaving a like and leaving a comment on this video. I always respond as usual, but it's really to help the algorithm for my case because I'm a small YouTuber and I don't really get that much traction on my channel as is, so if you guys could really do that, share the video, like and comment, I'd really appreciate it. And without further ado, let's begin with the video. And I love you guys to the moon and back, and to other galaxies and united. I don't know. But let's go. I have seen many paranormal entities during my life. Here's my first quite shocking meeting with a ghost. I was 7 years old then. I was in my grandparents' house with my mother. The house is about 80 years old. I was relaxing downstairs when the phone suddenly rang from upstairs. My mother proceeded to go upstairs to answer the phone, and I followed her. After climbing about halfway up the old staircase, I felt that somebody or something was behind me. I quickly turned my head, and that's when I saw a middle-aged lady climbing the stairs, holding out her hands as if to grab me. She was wearing a bathrobe, and her hair looked mangled. I freaked out and ran upstairs as quickly as I was able to. She surely was a ghost, because she wasn't a family member or a friend. I'd never seen her before, and my mother didn't even notice her. She disappeared as fast as I'd seen her. Unfortunately, that wasn't the only ghost experience I had in that house. I was about 10 years old when the second meeting happened. It happened in the same old staircase in my grandparents' house. It was late night, and I was going upstairs to get some sleep. That's when I quickly discovered that my route was blocked. At the end of the corridor where you turn right to get to the staircase was a man, a very unusual man standing there. He was wearing a gas mask, so I wasn't able to see his face. He didn't speak, nor did he move at all. He just stood still, and I was too afraid to go past him. So I then got my grandmother and went back to the corridor with her. The gas man was nowhere to be found. Understandably, I was too afraid to sleep, so my grandmother stayed the night with me. I'm pretty sure that my grandparents' house is haunted, and my friend has witnessed that too, as the next experience tells. I was 11 years old, and my friend was 12 when this happened. We were playing in the basement of my grandparents' house. It's no surprise that the basement is also quite unsettling, just as much as the rest of the house is. We were in the big room just under the staircase that leads to the middle floor. We were having fun, until both of us felt a strange feeling that made it obvious that we were not alone in the basement. We felt that there were other beings present, entities that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. We're also sure it wasn't our grandparents, because both of my grandparents were upstairs. That feeling also told us to leave the basement. It felt like we were surrounded by invisible people, and that we really needed to leave the basement immediately. After a few minutes, in a panic, we fled back up fast. Even at this stage in my life, it is still frightening for me to walk that staircase or be in the basement. I often feel the same feeling in these places that I felt 10 years ago. My friend also feels the same energy as well. Luckily, I haven't seen any ghosts since then. Regardless, one thing is certain. There's a lot of paranormal activity going on in that house, and I'm the person the spirits need to target, for whatever reason or another. My story starts back in 1991, when I first hooked up with my then boyfriend, now husband. My boyfriend lived on the bottom floor of a house that his aunt owned. His aunt and her family lived on the second floor. His cousin was my best friend, and so I was always at the house. We had a small, close-knit group of friends, and were over our house one time playing Truth or Dare. I remember it as being late at night, and we were sitting on Holly's bed playing this game, when one of the girls asked her if the house was haunted. Holly said that it was, and that it was her maternal grandmother. She then went on to tell us certain things that would happen, and most situations would take place right next to the father's recliner chair. About 15 minutes after we finished playing the game, I had to use her bathroom. Though I was so totally afraid to go alone, I didn't want to seem chicken, so I went on my own to the bathroom. Just as I was passing by the recliner, I noticed I suddenly got cold. It was a warm summer night when this happened. Okay, I chalked it up to being my imagination, seeing as we had just been talking about it. Then, years later, I had this woman I was working for, and we got along really well. So, one day she had invited me to her house. Well, as we were at her house, we were talking about ghost stories and the like. She excitedly pulled out her digital camera and led me upstairs to their master bedroom. We stood just outside the bedroom doorway, and she told me to take the camera and just scan around the room, starting in one corner and going to the next. Just see if you see anything, she said. I took the camera, still not knowing if I was truly a believer, and scanned the room. Suddenly, I moved back to the corner I just scanned over. She said, "You see something, don't you?" I did. I saw a greenish male figure standing in the corner, looking out the window. I was scared to death. But even when I scanned the corner again, the figure was there. We returned to the first floor of the house when she started to tell me all about it. They had bought the house just about a year prior. The first week they lived in the house, their children, very young children, would awake in the middle of the night, screaming and crying. Finally, one night, my boss's husband got so furious, he yelled, "I don't care that you're here. I don't care if you just stay. Just leave my children alone." The children never woke up crying again. Then about a week later was when my boss had noticed the image through her camera. She'd been going through various parts of the home, taking photos to send to relatives that lived out of state. When she was scanning the master bedroom, looking for a good view of the room, and found the exact image I found. She yelled for her husband, who saw the same thing, but it could only be seen through the screen on her digital camera. After I saw it, I was a believer. There was no way I would have seen it if it weren't there. A couple of days after she saw the first image herself, she was cleaning in the basement when she found a hidden room. She went into the hidden room and found a box of papers. They started investigating the roots of the home. She found out that the old police chief of Rennister, the town she had lived in, had built the house a very long time ago. The only thing she could figure is that the greenish male figure is the police chief, looking out the window and watching over his town. They still live in that same home, and they still live with their chief, all of them living peacefully together. Since I was little, I've been sensitive to ghosts. Sometimes I had dreams that would later turn out to be true. Also could tell which song was on next on the radio, knew who the phone call was next, etc. My experiences tend to happen at times when I'm either feeling low are just open towards the other side. My stories. As a little girl, I didn't like being in my room after it got dark, or darker when it was summertime. I remember feeling watched, and something wasn't right. A lot of times, I was so afraid of the door leading to the back of our house and the stables. I felt like something was looking at me and wanted to hurt me. This went on from when I was around 8 and stopped when I was 12. At times, they would show up only once. Once I was in bed and was close to falling asleep. Suddenly, I heard a voice calling my name. I woke up completely and looked into the corner of my room, and there was an old woman there. I couldn't see her clearly because she was kind of blurry, but she had a friendly feeling about her. She then disappeared, and I never saw her again. When I was 17, my dog died, and I was devastated. A few weeks later, I heard him coming up to my room from the kitchen and saw him enter my room. He then jumped up on my bed, walked around 3 times before sighing, and got down. I could feel him on my bed and against my leg. When I tried to touch him, he disappeared. My parents' farm, where most of the events happened, is old. It burnt down once there, and there seems to be quite a lot of ghostly activity. In the barn, my parents got their car. Since I was little, I was afraid being alone there. I felt something was wrong, and that something was hanging in the dark. I always felt uneasy there until a few years ago, when my mom told me that someone had offed themselves there. My worst experience I've had was when I was around 15 to 17 years old. My room was connected to the kitchen by a little hallway. From the kitchen, you can go directly to the 2 living rooms. The last one I've never felt easy in was always feeling unnaturally cold and just weird. One night, I woke up and my room was ice cold. I heard someone open the door from the hall to the kitchen. It was a man, and he was going directly to the last of the living room. Somehow I was there when he went there. I saw him take his rifle and then off himself. It was feelings more than actually seeing him do it. I then was back in my body, but heard him fall down to the floor, moved a bit, and moaned before he died. The second that happened, the coldness disappeared, and I could breathe again. I told my friend at the time about it, but I was too afraid to ask my parents. One day, I sort of jokingly asked if anyone had offed themselves in that room. My dad turned around and looked at me with a strange look. Yes, your godmother's father offed himself there. They hadn't told me, because my godmother didn't like me to know. I found his grave, and it happened the exact day he had offed himself. I've had nice experiences though. A friend of my parents and their friend had offed herself. My friend was really devastated about it and couldn't get over it. One day we were in the kitchen when I saw a sort of fog that turned into a ghostly hand. It may have looked ridiculous, but I'm telling you, I know with my own eyes what I saw. It was right on my friend's shoulder, almost as if to soothe her. After it disappeared, I immediately alerted my friend, and she said that her shoulder felt really cold. My friend then told me that she felt a lot of peace. To the both of us, it really meant a lot. The latest year, the happenings happened without any real pattern. Last year, when I was at my parents' and sleeping in my old rooms, I didn't get any sleep for the last 4 days I was there. There was a presence in the room, and it was not a pleasant one. It just radiated hatred, and it was pointed at me for some reason. The next time I got home, it wasn't in there, but then I had to sleep in my mom's bedroom. I was woken up by someone slamming their hands into the bed very hard. I looked at the end of the bed, and I saw a shadow standing there, then disappeared. Since then, I haven't felt it. For some reason, I knew it was male, but I didn't know why it felt so badly about me. When I'm home at my parents' now, there's a young girl there, something I can't feel what it is, and a man. None of these are evil, but just looking out for me. I've seen the girl from the corner of my eyes, and seen her reflected in the mirror. I think they are protecting me, and just looking out for me. At times I can enter a house and know that there's more than just what the eyes see. I felt the presence of family or just passerbyers. I do believe that at my parents' house, there's some kind of field of energy where these spirits can enter. Some stay, but others don't. I got one in my room where I live now. Just a little prankster, really. Turns on my computer, or opens all the cupboards. I did have an old man, though, who loved to watch me shower. I told him that it was rude, and I didn't like it. Since then, he hadn't been there. At the same time, there's a girl running every night on the upper floor. My brother is sensitive too, but apparently never experienced the same as I have at my parents' house. Seems I'm the only one they get attracted to. Also felt being pushed, but that happened at my parents' house as well. I don't mind having this ability, but I know I have to learn to control it. It can get to be too much at times. I've been doing some research about black spirits and ghosts. I had an experience in January 2000 when I lived in an old house in Portland, Maine. It was late in the evening, about 10 p.m. or so, when I felt something peering at me from a closet in my basement apartment. I thought nothing of it, but when I looked again, a materialistic, three-dimensional human-shaped figure with no facial features darted from the closet and stood behind me. It was suspended above the floor, about a foot or so. Before I knew it, two more had come out of nowhere. It happened so fast, and they moved so quickly, that I didn't even know what to make of this incident. I was a skeptic at the time, and had been all my life on ghosts, supernatural, etc. I was 36 years old at the time. There were multiple instances where I seriously felt like the house was shaking. Doors being slammed, open and shut, cabinets being open and shut as well, pots being moved around. It was seriously like a horror movie. I remember one time this happened, and it scared me half to death, almost literally. I ended up having a mild heart attack, and I ended up waking up in a hospital. All I remember was feeling the energy of what was happening that day, and then I lost consciousness, and that's when I was in the hospital bed. The doctor told me that the neighbor noticed something was wrong in that house, and noticed me lying on the floor, so she went and called the cops for me, and the ambulance arrived. They even told me that my heart stopped for a moment, and they had to use a defibrillator to bring me back to life. I was clinically dead, even though they only classified it as a mild heart attack. Anyway, I know this all sounds absurd, but I'm telling you, it definitely did happen. I'm just glad that I don't have to deal with it anymore. I don't live in the same place I do now. It was not worth it in the end. And after that heart attack, I don't think I'll ever be worth it. Scary stuff, poltergeists, and black beings on the walls. Definitely not something I want to deal with. One night, me and two guy friends were driving into Howard City, Michigan. We were driving down the road, and on each side, there's cornfields, and we saw two girls, one standing at the opposite side of the road, and another walking directly into our path. The girl walking into our path was wearing a gray sweatshirt, blue jeans, had blonde hair, and white eyes. The girl that was standing on the other side of the road was wearing a red sweatshirt, had brown hair, and wore blue jeans. As we're driving towards them, I tried as hard as I could to tell my friend's boyfriend to look out for her, but I couldn't. I couldn't say a word. I tried, and nothing came out, because I was so terrified of what I thought I saw. The girls had completely vanished. After we got to the stop sign, I said to my friend's boyfriend, "Did you see that?" He said yes, and the other guy that was in the truck with us asked me what, so I told him, and he said, "We have to go back and check it out." So we turned back around and went back down the road and found no signs of them. This is a remarkable story of ghosts from my experience. This happened when I was studying at my university. At that time, I was far away from home and stayed in a hostel near my university with my friends. Before I moved into the hostel, my friend who lived in the hostel told me that it was haunted. Actually, it was a house whose owner intentionally left this world. That's why many people have said that the hostel was haunted. They said that the spirit of the owner appears near the kitchen at night. Another said that sometimes you could hear the crying voices from the woman who owned the now hostel. At that time, there was only one last room available for me to sleep in, on the second floor, so I had to stay in that room. My room was in the last row. Many people have said that my room was terrifying because the surroundings around my room were quite dark and sunshine couldn't enter my room. There were multiple nights in which I kept waking up around 2:30 a.m. One night, I was terribly tired and went to bed earlier than usual. When I woke up, it felt as if somebody was pulling on my blanket from my feet, and so I pulled it back up again. However, when I went to pull the blanket back up, I still felt a resistance on my blanket. It definitely felt as if somebody was pulling it down again. I then felt annoyed and wanted to sleep. So I just said, "Stop it, don't disturb me, I really want to sleep." Surprisingly, it actually stopped, and I was able to sleep the rest of the night. In fact, nobody ever pulled my blanket again. In the morning when I woke up, I remember what happened last night and I started shaking. After that experience, it was pretty obvious why I always felt on edge whenever I slept in that room. Ghosts are pretty freaky. I was sleeping over my best friend Jasmine's house, and the night before, her mother promised us BLTs for breakfast. So that night, after setting me up in an air mattress for the room, we had gone to bed. That night was peaceful, but I'll forever remember that horrific morning. I woke up and looked up to where a person was just standing in front of the closed door from afar and simply staring at me. She was young, around my age at the time, with features almost identical to my friend. I was still half asleep and just figured it was my friend anyway. I began to ask her when we were going downstairs for the BLTs, and she just stared at me without saying a word. I closed my eyes for a little bit, then reopened them, and that girl was gone. I never heard the door open in her room, and somehow the girl was gone. I looked at my clock, and only 10 minutes had passed since I closed my eyes to lay down. I had screamed loud and ran down the stairs to find Jasmine and her mother sitting in the kitchen. They looked very concerned and asked me why I screamed. I told them that just 10 minutes ago I saw Jasmine, but she didn't say a word. Her mother looked at me and told me that Jasmine was downstairs for over an hour and had never once went back upstairs in the time in which I saw this girl. It was then when I realized that it was a spirit. Ever since, I've only seen the girl twice. On my friend's birthday, I was downstairs getting cake for some of the other girls, and I saw her standing in the pantry watching me. And the other time, I was in the basement with Jasmine. We were getting some laundry done when we all saw the girl run across the basement living room to his storage room. I haven't been back since, but the last experience helped my friends not think I was crazy. I've been enjoying your site, and I wanted to share some of my experiences. Well, I went to Mercyhurst College in Erie, Pennsylvania in 1995 to 96, and I left in the fall when my father died. Anyway, I lived in Egan Hall, which is connected to Old Main and the chapel, and I saw the nun and her antics almost daily. In the fall of 96, I saw a reflection in the bathroom windows at night. She often opened and closed the windows and doors, turned faucets and radios on, and flushed the toilets for hours on end. I was absolutely frightened at first. My roommate, a very down-to-earth, logical girl, told me a friend of hers who lived on the boys' floor saw the sister every morning, around 4 a.m. when he got up for crew practice. He would end up seeing her, but she was only there supposedly to look out for us. It turns out that the heartbroken nun story is just a fun, creepy story, and the truth is that the nun died peacefully of old age and stuck around to keep an eye on all the students. I also used to see a blue orb floating from the chapel through Old Main when I was coming back from the computer lab late at night. Other students had seen the orb originate from a small statue in the chapel, and a figure had been seen in the organ loft as well. I have heard that the path between campuses and New Covenant is haunted, but I can't verify that. In Springboro, Pennsylvania, there is a large Victorian house which had been used as a stop in the Underground Railroad. There had been a tunnel between the basement and the barn, but the tunnel was filled in the late 70s to early 80s for safety reasons, and the barn was moved to Cunnaville at some point. There are cold spots throughout the house, and a feeling of being watched. Sometimes, you can see strange reflections in the windows and lights or figures, just at the edge of your field of vision. The basement is very frightening. There is a feeling of pressure, and a very dark and menacing feeling. I mean, I feel very threatened if I go down there, no matter the time of day. When I'm alone in the living room without the TV on, I can hear muffled voices from the basement. I have always felt very negatively in this house. Now, about 4 years ago, I lived at Country Hills apartment in Las Vegas, Nevada. My family and I had some weird encounters there. Well, first, it started with this. My sister and I went to my grandparents while my parents stayed home. We were all the way in Cali from Las Vegas, Nevada for a weekend. My dad woke up at night, the night we left, claiming he heard a little girl singing in mine and my sister's room. He goes in there and sees my sister's rocking chair moving. Our second encounter was when my mom was going to take me to school one morning, and right when we open the door, the DVD player goes on, the radio on the DVD player. My mom and I were so tripped out, we were telling each other to turn it on, until eventually, my mom does it. Now how freaky and unexpected is that? Our third encounter was when the blinds for the sliding door that leads to the porch just started moving. It was strange, really strange. My uncle had moved in with us a little bit before the second encounter, but the only encounter that he shared with us is when he invited a friend over and the blinds were closed. Then he noticed that all of a sudden they were open. He told us, and we got tripped out. I was right next to the blinds too. That was my story, and thank you for reading. I work at a cemetery in California. I used to work the graveyard shift. As I was in the office doing paperwork, I suddenly heard a noise that startled me a bit. It almost sounded like faint singing from a distance. I got up, turned to face where I heard the mysterious singing. By the way, there were only 4 of us in the office. Everybody else was in the other room. And in that direction, I noticed a lady looking at me. She freaked me out so badly because she didn't even look real, translucent. All I could remember was that she had a smirk on her face and disappeared within seconds. It happened so fast, but I knew there was a lady there. She was just nowhere to be found. I walked around looking for this lady. I asked the other employees about it, and they all looked at me like I was crazy. So I forgot about it, went back, and finished my paperwork. Well, the next night, we got 4 bodies in. I started to do paperwork on this one lady. As I started typing in the information, I went to check the tab on her toe and took the sheet off to see her face. And it was the lady from the night before. It freaked me out. And after that experience, I never doubted ghosts again. I was at the job for only 1 week at the time. It's now been 10 years. I believe we walk and live with ghosts and spirits every day. They don't know they have passed on. I say that because I've experienced a few ghost sightings and I've heard things. It is so fascinating. In September of 2002, I was in Geneva, Switzerland on a business trip, and I was due to return home the day of my girlfriend's birthday. For her birthday, I purchased a violin, and I planned on giving it to her after she picked me up from the airport. The violin was at my house. The night before I was scheduled to return home, I called my girlfriend, but she was not home, so I left a message. After I hung up the phone rang back in my room in Switzerland. I picked the phone up, but I didn't hear anything. After saying hello a couple of times, I hung the phone up. Later that night, I again tried to call my girlfriend, and this time, she was home. As we spoke, she told me that she received both my messages. Having only called once before, I was very perplexed. I asked her what was said on the messages, and she described the first message that left to a T, but she thought that I was teasing her with the second message, since she thought that I might be giving her a violin for her birthday. After some prompting, she told me that she heard scratchy violin music, like a beginner tuning their instrument, followed by me saying hello, hello. I thought she was joking, but when I could tell that she was serious, I asked her if it sounded like the music, static, or some other background noise. She had the voice messages still on her answering machine, and she played both messages back to me. On the first message, I could clearly hear my voice saying that I just called to say hi, and that I would see her tomorrow. The second message starts with about 4 seconds of clear but scratchy violin music, and then I could very clearly hear my voice saying hello, hello. My girlfriend said that both the messages had my phone number and the caller ID. By this time, I had convinced her that I did not leave the violin music on our machine, nor were there any TVs or radios turned on in my room during the call. All I could think of was that I may have been hearing some future event when my girlfriend would be tuning her violin, and that I would not be around to hear it. So I changed my plane reservations to take a different flight home. Nothing happened to the plane that I would have been on, but I cannot help to think that the violin music was meant to be some type of warning. Maybe I would have had a car accident if I took the other flight, or I would have been hit crossing the road. Regardless, an omen like that is hard to ignore. I've kept the message recording as a reminder of this very strange experience. May 2006. It happened again. After over 3.5 years, we received another ghostly phone call. Last night, we were sitting at home when my girlfriend in 2002, cell phone rang. She answered it, and at first did not hear anything. Then, the sound of the same scratchy violin music became slowly more pronounced. She said hello several times, but had no response except the music. She handed the cell phone to me, and I also heard the violin. Then, the sound just stopped. I did not hear a phone hang up. It just stopped. I closed the cell phone lid and then checked the call log. There was no record of a call, incoming or outgoing, to the cell phone at that time. I'm scheduled for another flight to Atlanta on Thursday. I sure wish I could get out of it. In the Chinese calendar, people believe that the month of July is the time where all the ghosts come to Earth from hell. We call it the Ghost Festival. This is why Chinese people are very used to buying incenses in order to pray for these ghosts. During last year's Ghost Festival, something strange happened onto my family. It was the time where all my aunts and uncles and other relatives came back to my nanny's house. The entire family of mine sat in the living room, watching TV and chit-chatting. Suddenly, one of my aunts started yelling very loudly, "I'm cold, I'm bleeding, I'm in pain." She then ran upstairs and started throwing everything she saw. She acted insane, and her face turned pale. Every one of us in the family was shocked by her actions. We were panicked and did not have any idea of what had happened. My nanny was the only person who remained calm. Immediately she called the ritual witch, whom we called her as Boombo, to the house. As soon as the Boombo arrived, my aunt ran to her and wanted to choke her to death. She yelled, "I'm dead, and now it's your turn." Two of my cousins immediately captured her and pulled her away from the Boombo. The witch then murmured as if to cast spells on my aunt. About half an hour later, my aunt was awake. She said she felt exhausted and asked everyone what had just happened now. At the moment we told her the truth, my aunt was frightened and couldn't believe that. The witch told us that she was possessed by a ghost who was killed in an accident years ago. I have always been an avid believer in ghosts. I've never seen one physically manifest itself in human form, and I don't think I could cope if I did. I have an intense fear of ghosts, and at the same time, a morbid fascination with them. My first experience happened when I was 14 years old. I was going to stay with a friend of mine in a seaside village in Cornwall, England. I think it's called Portscape. My dad had a friend who drove me down to the meeting point where my friend, whose family were already staying there, would pick me up. This guy's name was Mike, and he was the nicest guy you could ever imagine. We joked all the way down in the car, and he wound me up with stories of the Beast of Bodmin, a supposed large cat that lives in the moors in Dortmund, the county before Cornwall. We had a good laugh. By the time we reached the meeting point, it had gotten dark, and my friend was unable to pick me up. Mike took me back to his house where I met his wife, Jenny. Jenny was as nice as Mike, but she was a little kooky, looking at things that weren't there and drawing really childlike pictures with crayons. I didn't really think much of it because I was tired from the journey. I was more fascinated with their house. Their house was so large that it had been divided into 4 apartments, each one with winding stairs, large rooms, and old-fashioned structures. The house itself dates back to the 1700s. After a while, I went upstairs to sleep in their son's room. He was away at the time and set about rifling through his music collection to pass the time. His CDs were in one corner of the room, and every time I was looking through them, I felt like I was being watched from another corner of the room. I looked over to where I felt this presence emanating from, and saw nothing except a barred window. It was only a small window with a few bars across it, and very high up. There was nothing there that should have made me feel so watched. I felt sleepy, so I turned the lights out and got into bed. As I was drifting off, I felt that same feeling of being watched. I snapped my eyes open and felt as if something retreated. Ignoring this irrational feeling, I turned over to sleep on my side with my back to the wall. At that moment, the door, which was one of the old barn-like doors with a latch, made a noise. I heard the latch lift up, and the door slowly creak open. Next, the light snapped on, and I was blinking in shock, trying to see what happened. Next thing I heard was a scaffolding, as something retreated down the slope accompanied by a horrific crackling, under-the-breath laughter that scared the heck out of me. I tried to see what happened, but the door opened towards me, and the light switch was beyond that, so I had no way of seeing who had turned the light on. From my bed, I tried to call out Mike, Jenny, but the words were really hard to say. I was so scared that any noise might bring the something back. I couldn't sleep with the light on, so I scuffled out of bed, switched it off, and practically jumped back into bed, and under the covers where I felt safe. I finally fell asleep and thought nothing of it. I didn't really think about it again until a few months later when, out of the blue, my dad mentioned he was thinking of taking me to Cornwall to stay at that house. I told him my story, and he told me that the house was haunted and that Jenny was one of those people who could see ghosts and communicate with them. He told me that the ghost that did that was probably Harry, a mischievous ghost. He also said that the house was full of them. A lot of children could be heard playing on the steps, and a Chinese washerwoman was always communicating with Jenny while she cleaned the kitchen. This at least explains some of Jenny's unusual behavior. She could sense ley lines and everything. Being terrified of ghosts, I totally freaked upon hearing this, especially as Dad told me we were going to stay there. A few months later, after my exams, he took me there as a treat. Knowing what I know now, it felt a little unsavory. I was absolutely terrified of walking into that house, especially as Mike and Jenny were away. I felt watched everywhere I went, and on the first night, I didn't sleep a wink or turn off the lights. The rest of the holiday, I actually spent sleeping in the same bed as my dad. A little unorthodox for a girl of 15, but it was a choice between my dad and the ghost, and I'd choose my dad any day. The last thing that happened which really scared me was that Jenny popped back for a short while and whilst there was cleaning the kitchen. As she did, I repeatedly saw her brush off something that wasn't there and say, with a giggle, "Get off," in the calm and patient way a mother does to a child that's pestering her for cookies. The next thing I saw was an invisible force actually pinch her clothing and pull it from her. I actually saw the shirt she was wearing become pinched and pulled away by nothing. She looked at me and said, "Oh, don't worry. That's just Hong Lee, the washerwoman. She thinks I'm not doing a good job of these surfaces." We didn't stay much longer. I've had several paranormal experiences during my life. Hearing my mother's voice after she had died, and feeling my mother-in-law's presence after she had also died. But in February 2002, an angel guided me from certain death. I awoke on a Saturday morning because I heard our dog whine, and that is when I realized our house was on fire. Our bedroom was off the living room, which was totally in flames. I yelled to wake my husband, who jumped out of bed and ran right through the fire and out the front door. I started to follow him, but a hand touched my right shoulder and turned me to the right. At the same time, I heard a voice in my right ear saying, "The window." I ran around the bed, opened the window and screen, and rolled out to the ground. It was a one-story house. I escaped with just a few burns on my back and left shoulder. My husband, on the other hand, was in intensive care for almost a month, with acute smoke inhalation and second-degree burns over half his body. I am certain that if I had followed him through that burning living room, I would have died. When I was in grade 3 of primary school, about 10 years old, I lived with my grandparents. Before, my great-grandmother also lived with us, but she had also passed away for approximately 5 years. I remember that night, it was Chinese New Year Eve. My family members all came back to my grandparents' house. After dinner, nearly 8 o'clock, my parents and other uncles and aunts went to play Mahjong game. When I was watching TV with my cousins, I felt thirsty, so I went to the kitchen to find some water. But something happened that I couldn't believe what I saw. It was a lady in the kitchen, a transparent figure. She was standing in front of the stove. However, the lady did not have any legs. She was just hovering above the kitchen. I was so scared to death that I ran out of the kitchen as fast as I could and ran into my uncle's and aunt's arms. 3 years ago, I was taking university classes at St. Peter's College in Saskatchewan, about an hour-and-a-half drive east of Saskatoon. The college was originally built as a monastery for monks who came up from Minnesota to found a colony around 1900. Since then, it had been expanded from a boys-only school to a fully integrated co-ed college. There are several ghosts on the property. One is supposedly the ghost of the first bishop of the area, who apparently died before the building's construction was completed. He can be seen occasionally walking the grounds. The other is a ghost of a small boy who had left this earth intentionally, or died from an accident by falling out an upper story window. The year before I came to the college, the fourth floor was used for the drama and art classes, and also had a small room where the staff could go for coffee breaks. One day, one of the women went upstairs to make some coffee. She was standing with her back to the door, loading the coffee maker, when she felt a presence behind her. Turning around, she saw a small boy standing there, then vanished right in front of her. The first year that I attended school, I took part in amateur night one Friday. I was invited back to the girls' residence by some friends for tea. The place had originally been a housing for a small group of nuns, that had lived at the colony and was only a few feet from the main buildings. It was after midnight when I finally said goodnight and headed out. I had taken no more than 3 steps when I had the most unshakable feeling that something didn't want me on the grounds. There was this sensation that I was being chased that I just couldn't stand, and I ran to my car. The feeling didn't stop until I crossed the railroad tracks, which I found out later was the marker of the boundaries of the college grounds. I told some friends about this, and we all agreed that we should stay some time after midnight and try to see some ghosts. Well, we tried, but that is as far as it went. None of us had the nerve to stay past midnight. Strange feelings and weird noises always promoted us to leave just before the midnight hour. I've been privileged enough to have the luxury of traveling on many cruises over the years. Being born into wealth, it's something that you get accustomed to. With that being said, all these experiences are not without their ghost stories. There were times in which I had terrifying encounters with spirits while alone in my cabin. I'm not just talking the stereotypical hauntings, knocks on the walls, objects being moved around, and other supernatural phenomena, but legitimate full-body apparitions and dark shadows looming the halls of the cabin, as well as seeing the presence of ghost sailors. One of my earliest paranormal experiences on a ship was when I was roughly 12 years old. My parents were wealthy enough to purchase a gigantic yacht for me and my family. However, we were able to buy it off the previous owner, who ended up being a great family friend. His name was Joe. Joe suffered from a multitude of health problems, suffered mild heart attacks, had high blood pressure. He really became somewhat of a father figure for me in my youth. Every time he'd see me, he'd run up to me and give me a giant bear hug and yell, "My little Sadie." He was such a great guy. However, being a 58-year-old male with all these medical health issues, I kind of felt like our days with him would be numbered. He suffered one last heart attack, and it would be the last of his life. That's because, unfortunately, this heart attack was the one which would take his life. So let me backtrack a little. Joe had been with us, me and my parents on the yacht, for the entire day. The morning before he died, Joe and I had a heart-to-heart. We were on lawn chairs on the deck, and he warned me about the dangers of excess, to not get so absorbed in these riches. Joe was a successful man, but he always reminded me that all of these riches don't mean a thing if you're not a good person at heart. I'll never forget his words. "Sadie, you can't bring anything with you when you're gone. These are the moments we live for. It's not about this yacht or the things you own in life. It's about the bonds we share with the people we love." I remember he urged me and said, "Do not waste this life. You can't get back this life, kiddo." I remember I just sort of smiled at him and nodded my head. Being 12, of course, I didn't really fully understand the magnitude of his words. So the day went on. We all had dinner together on that yacht, and later that night, that's when Joe decided to go back to his cabin to rest. He told us that he was very exhausted and just wanted a good night's rest. The morning after, I knocked on Joe's door in the cabin in his room. We had 3 separate rooms, and he wouldn't answer. I called for my parents. They opened the door, and that's when they found him dead. I was devastated and cried for days. About a month or so after his death, my parents were again on our yacht. All of our moments on our yacht were a little more somber after the death of our great friend Joe. Anyway, It was starting to get dark when my parents told me to get back into the cabin to go back to sleep. I yelled back that I wanted a few more minutes, and they eventually relented. Our yacht is pretty long, so there's a lot of space to get around. The next few events are unexplainable and lead me to believe that our ship was in fact haunted. So, I'm standing right in the spot that me and Joe used to, with our lawn chairs, and just taking in the scenery of the blue waters and breathing in the fresh air delicately touching my face. As I began to think of Joe, my eyes began to water. For some reason, I had an urge to look right behind me. Right behind me was where I could see the control room for where you could drive the yacht. As I stared into the window of the control room, I recognized the face for a few seconds. I knew it wasn't my imagination, but I wasn't able to figure out whose face it was. I got kinda spooked and ran into the cabin. My parents were both still there, so I had to rule them out. I didn't even mention what I saw to my parents, because I'm sure they would have dismissed me. Anyway, it's getting super late at night, and my parents are sleeping soundly. I had trouble sleeping because of what I saw, as well as the fact that I was profoundly missing Joe. I remember I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face and try to calm myself down a bit. However, once again, something insane happened. As I looked into the mirror, I saw the face of a man right behind my shoulder. Again, the face wasn't obvious, so I couldn't make it out, but it was enough to recognize that there was someone in the mirror. It's hard to explain, but it almost looked like a poorly rendered image from a video or something. Either way, I hopped back into bed terrified. It wasn't until days later, when I really thought about it, that I realized it could have been Joe's face in the control room and mirror. Knowing this possibility, it allowed me to become less frightened and more comforted. If it were Joe, I don't think his intentions were to scare me. I think he just wanted to let me know that he was okay, that he was watching over me. Years later, when I was 19, I was on the road and I got into a terrible car wreck. I crashed into a tree. Luckily for me, I was able to escape unscathed, and my parents drove me home. My parents were furious because I told them I had been texting and driving. Later that night, I had a dream. In the dream, Joe appeared in it. He looked very disappointed in me and literally said to me, "You have learned nothing. A phone is an object. Whatever you think is important can wait." All I could say to Joe was that I'm sorry I upset him, and he said, "Worry about yourself." The dream ended. I remember waking up in a cold sweat and crying. That's all I have for now. I'm 35 now, and to reiterate, the events in this story are 100% real and factual. I noticed that many stories on the site are lacking a bit of variety, and just wanted to share something different than the typical stories I read. I don't have that same yacht anymore, and I've since become a mother with a family of my own. I'm a 20-year-old English writing professional major, attending Slippery Rock University, Pennsylvania, and I've never believed in ghosts until this happened to me. Early last fall, my good friend told me about Snyder Cemetery in Butler County, Pennsylvania, and its alleged hauntedness. He, our other mutual friend, and I decided to visit it one Friday night. We drove up to the entrance, parked his truck, and bought a few lighters and a scented candle. The only things we had in the car that would emit light, and ventured in. We as a group initially found nothing out of the ordinary in the way of activity. I, however, started started hearing unhuman moaning coming out of the surrounding trees. My 2 other friends didn't hear them. However, when I asked them if they heard it, even as it was going on, still skeptical, it surely was some kind of animal, I told myself. I ventured around to the rusted iron gate in the back. As soon as I opened the gate, I felt as if I had walked into a wall. I've been in a life and death situation before. My arm was severed by a large piece of glass when I was young, and I know what it's like feeling and knowing that I may die. I had the same exact feeling as I walked through the entrance. I physically, for the first time that night, was scared. Beyond scared, petrified even. It was now dark. I creeped forward and lit my lighter to read a gravestone. I couldn't read it because of my actual shaking and fear. After about 15 seconds in the enclosed graveyard, I quickly exited. Then, the real problem started. As I went back to my friends who were standing at the entrance, they both decided it was best to leave. Apparently they were bored. We walked out through the entrance and got into his truck, a late 90s GMC pickup. The truck wouldn't start for about 5 turns of the key. Eventually, it did start. Then the truck's headlights started flickering extremely rapidly, but randomly, from high to low beam, as if being controlled by a person. We started barreling down the gravel road, in fear of whatever it was doing this. Immediately we noticed that a dense, zero visibility fog had come around our truck. We could only see about 3 inches past the headlights, and only the outline of the road. Burton Road extends for probably about 2 miles either direction out of the cemetery. For that entire stretch, we had no visibility due to the fog, and the truck's lights were behaving erratically, as previously stated. As soon as Burton ended, and we were on the main road, the fog disappeared, and the headlights were fine, and have been ever since. No areas that we drove through to get home had fog, and the lights haven't acted that way since. These are the things we have experienced. Cell phones go out as soon as you get onto Burton Road. No service from 4 different providers, including Virgin, Nokia, Verizon, and TracFone. Drums. This is sometimes listed on other sites, but not on yours. Odd, bassy but wooden sounding drums are heard. Not like a bass kick drum, but more of a war drum sound, playing simple war beats. Sounds of heavy creatures, peoples, or whatever entities in the woods, snapping sticks, walking in trees, etc. When pulling out, a feeling of tugging or extra weight in the car, as if we were riding the brakes, or we had about 500 pounds in the trunk. I hope all of this will be helpful in your listings on your hauntings. One last thing. Butler County, Marine State Park, Burton Road, Snyder Cemetery. Red eyes will chase you out. Also, something else will chase you out as well. It is Conrad Snyder, who is haunting the family's resting place. I've been reading the stories on the site for a while, and I would like to share one of the many experiences I've had. This was without a doubt one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Now, as a little bit of a backstory, I've been aware of the other realm and its inhabitants all my life. Also my mother, her mother, my Nana, and her mother, my great-Nana, have as well. I've been in tune with the entities that are among us my entire life. So, to say that this particular event scared the heck out of me is saying a lot. But I think the only reason why it scared me so much is just because it happened to someone I love, and it hits so very close to home. I want to make it very clear that I am absolutely no way being dishonest. Here is my story. My boyfriend and I had just recently gotten together, and had only been dating a few months. We were house sitting at his parents' house while his parents were out of town, and we were sleeping in his parents' room. Also, we had just gotten our dog. That was a puppy at the time, a week before. This is all relevant to the story. It was a Sunday, and things had felt very different that day, not normal, and I had taken a nap during the day, which for me is just simply not something I do, but it was a good thing that I did, and I found out why later. As the day turned to night, around 11 p.m., I tried to get my boyfriend to come to bed with me. He was acting weird, and said that he would be coming to bed really soon. Now, like I said, it was around 11, and anyway, I went to bed, and I ended up jolting awake at 10 minutes till 5 in the morning. I remember because I looked at the clock. Anyway, my boyfriend had not come to bed yet, and all the lights were still on in the house, but I disregarded, and I laid back down. Then I heard him coming down the hall, and got into bed. When he laid down, he obviously sounded very tired, and he said, in almost a dazed voice, that there was a man outside the front window of the house that he and the dog both saw, and they didn't like the way the guy looked. He also said that he had just taken a sleeping pill. Now, my boyfriend kept telling me to look out the window. At this point, I was getting freaked out, because my boyfriend says there's a weird-looking guy outside, and he just took a sleeping pill. So I told my boyfriend I was going to call one of my friends that is expertly versed in the ways of the supernatural. And when I told him that, he started saying, "No, don't call her." And at that point, I immediately called her. Now, while I was on the phone with her, my boyfriend shot upright in bed and started repeating the phrase, "When all the lights go out." He just kept repeating it, and then, as he was halfway through the saying, his voice changed into the most demonic sounding voice I've ever heard in my life. I have never moved so fast in my life. I turned on all the lights and went to the living room. I was just watching the hall to see if my boyfriend came after me. I was trying to decide if I should go to my car, but I was under the impression that someone was out there, so I felt trapped. But I finally got enough courage to get to my car, and I never saw anyone outside, and to this day, I still firmly believe the man who my boyfriend saw was the demon. As I sat out there trying to call one of my friends to come to the house so that I wasn't alone, my boyfriend kept calling me from the house. Now, he kept saying on the phone that he couldn't move, yet he was able to call me. Our dog was very small and in a big deep box at the time. He kept telling me that our dog was in the hall and bleeding, that he was scared and he needed me. I knew things still weren't right, and then before I knew it, he was speaking and laughing in that demonic voice again. Finally, around 6 a.m., my friend showed up and he escorted me into the home. When I got back to the bedroom, my boyfriend was passed out, and I went up to him with my blessed cross, and remember, he's passed out. And every time I got the cross 2 inches from his hand, he would close his hand. My friend saw that his eyes did not move, and were closed, and he was not awake. If I had not had a witness there, I wouldn't believe it myself. Then, as I turned my back and started to walk away, he started laughing in that voice again and telling me to get out. Then, I told the demon that I was aware of what it was trying to do. Then, my boyfriend passed out again. So my friend and I left the home because I had to go to work. Well, later that day, my boyfriend called me asking why our dog was in its box in the bathtub with the water running. I had not done that, and he obviously didn't do it either. When I started talking about the events of the night, he didn't remember any of it. But he did talk to his mom, and she said that the same thing had happened to his dad many years before. I knew that there was something in that house, but what had visited that night was not it. I grew up on a farm and I had stepbrothers and sisters. We lived in this old farmhouse that had 4 bedrooms upstairs, and I'd shared a room with my stepbrother who was about 2 years younger than me. It was 1986, and I was 17 when this happened. Our room was a small one, but we had 2 beds in there, and the way I had my bed was that the end of my bed was towards the bedroom door, and then my head was about 2 feet from the wall because I had a couple rifles, a .22 and my .32 Winchester Special. The night this happened, I was sleeping on my belly with my arms under my pillow, and something woke me up. It wasn't a noise or a light. Maybe it was a dream, but I woke up and kind of pushed myself up a little bit with my arms to look at the door. When I looked, there was this figure, a dark shadow, or better yet, like a silhouette, and for some reason, almost telepathically I learned that it's just one of my sisters. Their room was straight across from mine on the other side, just bringing in one of the cats to sleep with me, because the cat was keeping them up. We had a lot of barn cats that weren't allowed in the house. So I turned back around the way I was before I woke up, and laid my head back down, and I expected the cat to be put on my bed, and the feeling that I got was very comfortable feeling, like everything is okay. A few seconds later, I felt the weight of the cat snuggled up to my side, like it was half on my bed and head, and paws on my kidney area of me. I woke up a couple more times feeling this kitty cat still next to me. I was going to reach around and pet it, but I didn't want to wake her up. After a good night of sleep, I woke up and I couldn't believe that the cat was still in my bed and partially on my side, and I did not find a cat on bed with me. I found my .22 rifle laying across my back. I was totally confused by this. I wanted to confirm that it was not me who put my rifle across my back, so I put it back to where I had it before I went to sleep, and to be able to get at it, I would have to have gotten on my knees and reached way over to the corner, and with one arm grabbing it, and I couldn't lift it up at that angle. Of course, nobody had believed in me, so I just never tell the story, except for now. For my next story, I'm going to say something first as it relates to my story. I have what is now known by some as sleep paralysis. I'm sure a lot of you know what this is, when you wake up and you are mutually awake, but you cannot move. This is a very terrifying experience. I have heard many theories on this, and the one that makes the most sense to me is by Sylvia Brown. She says that while you sleep, your soul leaves its vehicle, your body, and goes wandering around to various places. As a result, your body wakes up, but you can't do anything about it because your soul isn't back from its journey to whatever. On with the second story. After we had sold the farm, my family moved into this town called Ashland, Wisconsin. I decided that if I wanted to make it in life, I had to go to college, so I stayed in this house my parents bought, which was very old. Not sure what year it was built, but it was one of the first ones built when the town started. My room was a very small room, about the size of a large bathroom, but it worked. The year was 1993, and I stayed there throughout my college years till I graduated. One night, again I was sleeping on my belly, and I was in a very deep sleep. Something woke me up, not a noise or light. Everything was as dark as it could get. It woke me up enough where I sat up and I was staring towards my door. I couldn't see my door. It was so dark. I was wide awake and I kept looking at it, almost as if I was in a trance of some sort. All of a sudden, I got this telepathic-like communication that told me that everything is okay. You don't have to worry. This feeling is the most bizarre feeling, as if someone's mind is with my mind, talking to each other. So then I was told to lay down, and don't be scared. Then I got this extremely comforting feeling, so I laid back down, except this time I laid down on my left side. Then I felt someone or something's hand around my neck, and it started to squeeze, and then it cocked my head over to the side of my bed, by my neck. Meanwhile, I tried my hardest to yell or scream to wake someone up, but all that could come out of my mouth was a little gargling sound that no one could hear, except for myself. This was extremely terrifying. Then I had the feeling of high voltage electricity that make this humming sound and buzzing sound, and feeling this throughout my entire body. I then woke up in the morning in that exact same position that it left me in. So, those are somewhat short versions of my two stories. I have many more like them. Thank you for taking the time to listen. During my college years, my brother and I lived in an old brownstone in South Minneapolis. The apartment itself was large and sublevel with 2 bedrooms. From the moment we moved in, we knew there was something wrong. On numerous occasions, I saw someone in my hallway moving across the rooms out of the corner of my eye. I always felt that it was my eyes playing tricks on me initially. Then stranger things began to occur. We began to have our television turn itself on at night. The stereo would do the same. I would be sleeping at night, and it would just start blaring. My bedroom was the worst. It was uncomfortable. I became afraid to sleep in there. I could not describe the feeling. I began sleeping out in the living room or on the futon. Finally, I told myself to stop with the silliness and resign myself to sleep back in the bedroom again. I did so uncomfortably for a few nights, only to be awakened one night by a man's disembodied head hovering above me and smiling. I still very clearly remember it. I screamed as loud as I could and took off out of that room and never slept in it again. We moved out after 6 months of living there. There is a large home in Martin that I lived in for 20 years. It used to be a carriage stop. The first day I was moving in, there was a woman in a black high-collared dress peering out at me and my mother. The curtain was being held back, and she was fiddling with the brooch and the collar of her dress. Once inside the house, it appeared to be a bundle of gray dusty rags floating in the air close to the ceiling. It swooped down under a doorway and went out through the window. It has been seen many times in the road in front of the house. A man in a black coat with a high collar holding a lantern and swinging it back and forth as if to lead the way for persons passing through. Sleeping on the couch one afternoon, a little girl in a blue dress was standing in front of me. I couldn't see her face, but she seemed so real. Lying in bed at night, and sometimes in the morning, footsteps could be heard walking up the stairs. You can't move. You feel a weight that holds you still. All you can see is the boots of a large man. He looks into every bedroom and then goes back downstairs. You can then move. In the parlor, you could hear a party going on, and while that is going on, you hear a baby crying. When my mom and I were sitting in the dining room, we both saw objects being thrown across the laundry room. You feel cold and get goosebumps throughout the house. A while ago, me and my friend were doing a project for school, and we got to choose what we did. So we did ghosts and hauntings, and we used the site, and it helped us loads. But anyway, while we were working, our substitute came over and saw what we were doing, and he asked us if we ever had seen a ghost. I think I've heard a ghost crying, but I wasn't too sure, and my friend hasn't seen anything. But my sub said that he had seen one. He said that he went to look after his nephew once, and he saw something. He said that he went around to his brother's house, and while his brother and his wife were getting ready, his nephew came downstairs and told his dad that he had seen the man with the big hat and the funny glasses right upstairs. My teacher asked his brother what he was on about, and his brother said that he had seen the ghost again. My teacher didn't believe him, but his brother said he'd seen it upstairs. Then when his brother and his bro's wife had gone, his nephew, who was only 5, wanted to play football in the garden. So as they were going through the kitchen, his nephew said that the man with the big hat and funny glasses was behind my teacher. He freaked out and was scared to death. He said he just wanted to get out of the house, but made himself turn around. He said that he saw a gaslight form that had a pilot's hat on, an old one, not a helmet like nowadays, and that the thing was wearing big goggles. He later found out that his brother's house was built in an old airfield. The story freaked us out. Hey, I see you. You're trying to leave the video and close it out without commenting at least. Can you at least share the video or like it? I told you at the beginning of the video, and you're still not doing it? Well, you're not getting away with it. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I love you, and I'll see you in the next video.